Welcome to Made with Love, a series where we explore how food, family, and traditions shape our identities. No matter your culture, a home-cooked meal is always the most simple and welcome form of showing you care. On today's episode, PhuongDuy Tran will be making a traditional Vietnamese ginger chicken dish called gà kho gừng, all made with love.
Hi, my name is PhuongDuy Tran. I am a Vietnamese American. I am a programs manager for the Rose Kennedy Greenway Conservancy. Today, I'm going to be cooking a traditional Vietnamese dish called gà kho gừng, which translates to chicken braised ginger. Let's get started. So first step is prepping the chicken. Here I have drumsticks, but honestly, you can use whatever cut of chicken you want. I think drumsticks are just much more affordable. And also a good cut of meat is just chicken quarters. I think for this dish specifically, because it's so affordable to make, that is why we use these specific parts of the chicken. And I will get started with my cleaver. Oh my gosh. I like to cut them into pretty smaller pieces, just because it's more bite-sized, it's easier to handle, and also more of the chicken gets marinated with flavor. So next we're gonna marinate the meat and just let it sit for at least 15 minutes. In doing so, I like to marinate it with a little thick soy sauce. I don't measure typically in our household. It's really guesstimate, taste, and fix as you need. Then I'm going to add some mushroom seasoning, which is super important to my cooking, or like my family's cooking, just because this adds the umami, that extra depth of flavor that you don't quite know what it is. I think a lot of Asian cooking, they'll add MSG, which does have a bad rep, but this is a great alternative as well. I'm gonna also add a tiny bit of sugar as well as fish sauce, which I know doesn't sound appetizing, but it's such a core in a lot of Southeast Asian cooking, and it really pulls flavor out of pretty bland ingredients like chicken. Then if you want, you can mix it with your hands, but I just washed my hands, so I'm gonna mix it with a spoon. You wanna make sure it's pretty well combined, and you can see the chicken start changing the color. So make sure it's all coated. Once it's marinated, you're just gonna set it aside, and you're gonna go ahead and start prepping other ingredients, which I'm gonna start prepping the ginger, garlic, and scallions. So I'm gonna start with the ginger, and an easy way to remove the skin is just by scraping it with your spoon. Why I chose this dish, in a simple answer, is it's one of my favorites, but also it's just one of those dishes that I grew up with. It's easy to make in bulk, and especially growing up as a first generation Asian American, we didn't come with too much money. So a big part of this dish is how budget friendly it is and how easy it is. So you have a knob of garlic, but I feel like you'll only want half of this, maybe the size of a thumb. But it's up to you and how you like the strong sense of ginger. I'm gonna cut it into slices. I like to stack my slices and just start going in on the thin slices. Our family dynamic is interesting because I think first generation Asian American immigrants, your folks are typically always working. Up until I was at least 7 or 8, they were working 7 days a week. So I wouldn't get to see them too frequent. And I feel like obviously my sister and I had to be fed. So what would be left in presents to know that they're there, or maybe even their way of showing their love is they leave us traditional Vietnamese dishes that we can eat with rice, and this was definitely one of them. I feel like because growing up, my family and I were pretty separated just because of our work obligations. Being able to, sit together as a family of four was pretty rare. But when we did get to sit together, it was always centered around food and eating together. And we're gonna get some scallions ready. I always think most of the flavor is at the bottom where the white part is. And I like to kind of crush it a bit to make sure the flavor pockets are open and the juices are out there once it starts cooking. But I like to save the very ends to put in a cup of water, and you can grow your own scallions, which I'm pretty sure everyone in America did during the pandemic. This is gonna be used mostly for garnish, but the subtle flavor of scallion juices adds a really good punch at the end. So we're gonna start cooking the ginger and garlic with some oil. I like to use olive oil. It starts to become more fragrant and it'll start to pull the aromatics out of these ingredients. And once it starts browning, we can add the chicken in and making sure the chicken is cooked on all sides, and we'll go from there. So I'm using an Instant Pot. Typically, I feel like these dishes are made in just like a regular pot, a clay pot that can be braised for a long time. But for space sake, I'm gonna be using my Instant Pot. I'm gonna start with the saute setting and I'm gonna put it on low. It's going to beep. All right, gonna add the oil in and coat the bottom so it doesn't stick. And I'm gonna wait for it to heat up a little bit. Growing up in Cape Cod, where it's a primarily, white Caucasian neighborhood, and being the minority of the area, like I think me and another girl were like the only Asians in the school. It was hard to really be in touch with my heritage, culture, and traditions because not having that same community that understands where you're coming from, it was hard to just celebrate who I was. And so I feel like being home with my family, a few things were at home, me and my sister were typically not allowed to speak English. Anytime we would, my parents would call us out. And at the time, obviously, as a kid, I think that's so annoying. So I'm like, all the other kids speak English at home, why can't we? But I am so glad that they implemented that, just because it's really, the language is something that really keeps me in touch with the culture. And aside from that, of course, food. I think food is probably the biggest way that we are able to hone our traditions, because it's through the flavors that are so unfamiliar to, Americans, or just in the environment I live in now. It really does feel and taste like home. Anytime, like, I'm away, or for example, when I was in college, I know I would be like, man, I miss home cooking. And for me, like this dish, it tastes like home for me. So now that oil is hot enough, I'm gonna throw in some of the ginger. Ooh, that sizzle. And the garlic. And I'm gonna start stirring that around. It smells so good. Now that it is pretty cooked, we're going to add in the chicken that was marinating. There's something about a good sizzle sound. I don't know what it is, but it gets me very excited. Now you're gonna wanna make sure the chicken is cooked on all sides before you add in the next couple ingredients. So a few lessons that have always been passed down to me from my family, I would say be humble, and also just remembering your hardships, especially holding on to your hardships
to keep you humble. For my folks, they always make it a point, anytime I see them, they always remind my sister and I about how they came to America and how lucky we are for the opportunities that we have. I am Vietnamese, and specifically I'm from the southern region, so after the war, it was fairly hard to just readjust to life. And my dad just felt like, we can't raise a family here, like we need to go. And so he tried to escape the country at least 15 times. And the 16th time he actually was caught and put in jail for 9 years just for leaving. And it just shows how crazy times were then in that country. After those 9 years, him and my mom got married, and they were together this whole time. So my mom was honestly just waiting for him to get out. They got married, they had my sister, and 6 months after she was born, my dad was just like, we really can't raise a family here. It's dangerous. How are we going to make enough money? How are we going to live? Like, how are we going to provide for our kids? And so even after being in jail and being very scarred from that, he felt like it was big enough risk to try again. And so they did. And how it went back in the day is you would have to sneak out in the middle of the night when, you know, communists or army men were not at their peak and it was dark enough to hide. And you would have to find a trusted boatman. Because often these, the people with boats, they would be bribed by the northern Vietnamese to essentially try to ploy and gather folks who wanted to escape, but really catch them and put them in jail. And so my dad found someone trusted, and we got on a boat, hence the term boat people. And initially the boat was headed to Malaysia, but within a couple of days of just being in the water, the boat actually broke down. The engine broke down, and my mom, dad, and sister were stranded at sea for 3 days, surrounded by the Indian Ocean. And I know it sounds like picturesque in a sense, but it's terrifying to peer out in the water and not be able to know where's that next plot of land. So at that point, I think my mom was saying that everyone was just like preparing and waiting to, you know, wither away. So my mom had this strange, almost daydream. She wasn't asleep, but she told me she closed her eyes, and she said that one of the Vietnamese goddesses told her to wake up because a boat is coming, which sounds ridiculous because my dad just brushed it off because he's like, it's because lack of water, you're hallucinating, you're imagining things. But then, long and behold, my mom was saying she saw something in the far distance that looked like a bowl of rice because it was so far. And eventually it got closer and closer. And she realized that's a giant cargo boat. It was a Russian cargo boat. And they were like, this is our chance. We have to do something, because otherwise they weren't going to survive. And so my dad and a few other men on the boat just jumped in the water and started swimming towards the cargo boat, got on the ship. There was a language barrier. Obviously, they speak Russian. My dad speaks Vietnamese. No English at the time. So how they communicated is they drew on a piece of paper of just like a picture of a boat and where they need to go. And originally the captain was like, oh, we can just bring you back to Vietnam. Which my dad was like, he kept on doing this. He's like, no, they will kill us. They will kill us. So the really nice Russian cargo boatman brought us to Malaysia at first, which the camps were full. So they brought us to Singapore. The camps were also full. Finally, they brought us to the Philippines, where they accepted us in a refugee camp in Palawan. And that's where I was born. And so we were there for 5 years before we came to America. And by the time we came to America, I was only a baby, but their upbringing from America was so tough, adjusting to the American dream, which sounds so lush, so beautiful, so awesome. But when you don't know the language, the culture, the people, it was so hard because people in those times weren't so beautiful. They were actually rather mean and aggressive, from like bullying as a kid, or even my dad getting jumped while he was fishing. My parents' first purchase coming to America was a bicycle, an old bicycle that they found at a garage sale. With that bicycle, my dad was able to go to work every day, and at that time they worked in factories. And eventually they built their way up, but also we got so lucky in the sense that my dad befriended someone who just saw that he was a good guy and basically was like, if you guys get your nail license, I will cover for the salon and an apartment before you guys can pay me back. And so he was able to help us get my parents licenses to do nails and a salon on Cape Cod. So that's how we diverged to the Cape. And without this friend, we wouldn't be where we are at all. Like, we hold such a close bond to that nail salon. Even though they work so hard there, it is the foundation of why we're able to have the opportunities that we do. It's also why, like, my parents pushed me and my sister so hard in school, because they're like, you don't want to end up like us. We want you guys to do better than having a salon. We want you guys to do better than where we came from, because they didn't have education. Like, both my folks, in Vietnam, you have to be able to pay for like the traditional clothing, like áo dài, which is the long Vietnamese dress, and they were both very poor and they couldn't afford that. So after like, I think like the 4th and 5th grade, they had to like drop out and like work with their family. And so that's why they were like, they think that the key to success is just being educated. And that's why they push us so hard. And that's why I think sometimes a lot of, Americans or like the kids growing up would kind of tease me if I would be upset about a grade, but they don't understand that the backstory of what that grade means to me. It means making my parents proud. It means like making sure they know I'm working hard to do something that will, surpass where they wanted us, or like surpass where they were worried where we would be if we didn't go to school. So now that most of the chicken is cooked, we're going to add in a little water to cover it, and a little more fish sauce to pull out savory flavors, and also mushroom seasoning for that umami oomph. And mix it up a little bit more. And because this is an Instant Pot, typically you would allow this to braise for at least a half hour. But I'm just gonna change the mode to pressure cook. Well, I'm gonna cancel it first. Pressure cook, I'm gonna put it on for 5 minutes on high. I'm gonna put the cap on. It's a little jingle, start, and we'll wait. Kids today, they should definitely keep an open mind when it comes to like taste palettes and foods around the world, just because what might not be familiar to them, it's someone else's delicacy, it's someone else's, average normal meal. You don't want to judge someone just because, those kind of comments at such a young age, it can really affect your outlook on your own culture. And for me, it brought shame when it shouldn't had to. Food is such an important aspect of just being able to hold on to your culture, especially for someone like myself who's fairly Americanized. Food is what brings me back home. I feel like as a kid, when you make those judgments, it just makes you almost want to lose that culture. And culture is so beautiful. That's what makes the world beautiful. Try different things, as you should as a kid. And it's also okay to not like them, as long as You know, you keep the open mind to understand why it might be so special to someone. For example, another dish that gets a lot of like negative comments is bitter melon, just because like the sound, it's a very bitter vegetable. Well, in some cultures that taste is really good to them. And also there are like underlying reasoning why it's good. I was always told from my parents, like, for bitter melon, it reminds you the taste of hardship. And that's why it's so good to them, because it just reminds them of, you know, what they went through to get to their successes. And I feel like there's a story in each dish. There's a story in each types of food and region that really is telling about the culture and the people. And I think generations ahead just need that exposure. All right, so now that the Instant Pot has spoken, it is done. I'm gonna just release it, which it has already naturally open, and see how it has progressed. It smells good. And I'm just gonna put it on a low saute to keep it warm, and also add any extra ingredients based on flavor. Because the Instant Pot really pressure cooks at this point, the more time you put into it, it's going to completely fall off the bone, which can be harder to eat with. A tiny bit of sugar, add a little bit more water. Then I like it thicker, so I'm gonna add some cornstarch slurry. Once I mix up the slurry, I'm gonna add a little bit to chicken. And for it to thicken, it needs to boil to kind of activate the cornstarch mixture. So I'm gonna let that boil together. That'll be a few minutes. So now that it's done, we thickened up the sauce, we add some last minute ingredients, we're ready to plate. Make sure there's some sauce on there, because that goes really well with white rice.
That's good. Hell yeah.
Yay!
That's really good.
My heart! So that's how you make gừng. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you give it a try. I hope it inspires you to expand your taste palette. Thank you for joining me on Made with Love.